Welcome everybody. Today's chapter is called The Plan and the Man. Some people like to think of the Bible not so much as a dramatic story, but as a proper drama. A drama of the acts of God. If we look at the Bible in this way, we can divide it up quite easily into 3 acts, with a prologue and an epilogue. What we have so far been thinking about is the prologue to the drama, Genesis 1 to 11. As we've seen, it's not historical in anything but the most general sense. There is, after all, a universe which has somehow or other come into existence. And there was a flood in Mesopotamia a long time ago, but that's about as much as we can say. Whether any of the characters in the prologue ever existed, or bore the names which are attached to them, is really of no importance. For the Bible uses myth, legend, poetry and symbolism as readily as it uses the facts of history to convey its message. But it is quite clear that when we reach the 12th chapter of Genesis, which begins the story of Abraham, we're in quite a different atmosphere. We start now to deal with real people. So far, we've been given, in the prologue to the drama, a picture of ourselves and the world we live in. It's been presented largely in the form of brief stories, but the message is unmistakable. On the other hand, the Bible has hammered home the point that the twist in human nature cannot be straightened out by ourselves. Whether we call it original sin, or rebellion against God, or just plain selfishness, there is something in us all that shatters our dreams of utopia, makes a mockery of our good intentions, and wrecks every well-meaning enterprise. On the other hand, we've been shown that this is not how God intended our life to be. He meant us to be free. And it's not his fault that we abuse our freedom. Yet because he created us, he wants to save us from ourselves, since we are our own worst enemies. Time after time in the prologue, we've been given hints of his intention, pointers to the divine compassion, which will not leave us in our plight. But now the drama proper begins. Act 1, which starts at the 12th chapter of Genesis, discloses God's plan of action. Towards the end of the prologue, in the story of the Tower of Babel, we're left with a picture of mankind at loggerheads with itself and estranged from God. Before the prologue ends, in the last few verses of chapter 11, attention is focused on a particular group which is to be the instrument of God's purpose. Out of the whole human race, the choice is narrowed down until it rests upon one tribal group of Hebrews, and in the last resort, upon one man, Abraham, who is to be the founding father of a new kind of community within the world, the people of God. The mythological figures of Seth and Noah have already pointed in this direction. But now we are in touch with a man of flesh and blood who is selected for this high vocation. The divine plan is to build out of this man and his descendants a people who will be taught the truth about God and themselves, and who will be charged with the task of communicating this knowledge to the rest of the world. They are to be the nucleus of a new community, bound to God in obedience and service, setting an example which will attract the remainder of mankind and turn them in the end into the sons and daughters of God that all of us were meant to be. Why, out of all the peoples of the world, it should have been the Jews, and not the Egyptians, Babylonians or Assyrians, to say nothing of Greeks and Romans, was as much a mystery to the Jews then as it is to us today. As far as numbers, power, culture and skill are concerned, any of these others would have seemed a much better candidate. nor was it that the Jews had any greater natural flair or aptitude for religion than the rest. Yet the fact remains that it was the Jews who were chosen. How odd of God to choose the Jews! No one was more puzzled about this than the Jews themselves. Yet as far as Abraham was concerned, nobody could deny that he was a worthy choice. Where he and his people came from originally is uncertain. They formed part of the Bedouin peoples, who from time immemorial had drifted out of the sparse scrubland of the desert into the rich lands of Mesopotamia and Egypt, well watered by their rivers and irrigation systems, and known as the Fertile Crescent. Abraham first appears in the biblical record at Ur of the Chaldees, an ancient city of Babylonia 100 miles or so from the top of the Persian Gulf, in present-day Iraq. Being nomads, pasturing flocks of sheep and goats, it's unlikely that Abraham's family lived in the city itself, though guides confidently point out Abraham's house among the ruins of Ur, which the archaeologists have excavated. It's much more likely that they lived in tents nearby and made use of the city markets. In the stories that are told of Abraham and his descendants in these early days, we have to make allowances for the growth of legends connected with them over the years. Abraham probably lived about 1750 BC, and none of the Bible was written before about the 10th century BC. Before that time, stories were handed down by word of mouth from father to son, told by storytellers around campfires, sung by minstrels in the form of ballads, or recounted by priests at shrines and sanctuaries. Yet we should remember that Oriental memories were much better trained than our own, especially in an age when most people could not read or write, and where there were no distractions such as television. We also know how reluctant children are to accept a different version of a story from the one which they're familiar with. If someone telling the story of Red Riding Hood were to suggest that Grandma swallowed the wolf, there will be an outcry. Similarly, we can imagine simple tribesmen protesting if a storyteller departed from the well-known details of a particular tale. This will be especially true in the case of venerated figures such as Abraham and his descendants, who were regarded with ever-growing respect as time went on. Nevertheless, we have to allow for exaggeration, occasional confusion, and the inevitable pious legendary elements that grow up around saintly characters. Yet, legends can tell us quite a lot about the people who figure in them. And the Old Testament has many which help us to form a clearer picture of the men concerned than we should get from a prosaic history book. Archaeologists tell us that the stories of the patriarchs, Abraham and his successors, are full of background detail which is confirmed by excavations. But of course, we cannot expect particular incidents or dialogues to have been accurately remembered over so long a period of time. These are shaped by the storyteller's imagination.